Imagine waking up and realizing your home is basically a miniature zoo. A dog is curled up by the door. A cat is asleep on the couch. Chickens scratch around the yard, while cows and horses live on a nearby farm. Yet every one of these animals descended from wild ancestors that had no need for humans and might attack anything that came too close. So why did they begin living beside us? Did some fearless ancient human capture a wild animal and decide to keep it, or did the least aggressive animals approach our campfires on their own, drawn by the smell of food? Did humans choose them, or did they choose us, trading freedom in the wild for food, protection, and an easier life? Look across the planet, and you'll find more than 15,000 species of birds and mammals. Yet fewer than 40 have become truly dependent on humans. That's strange, because plenty of wild animals look gentle, adorable, and almost as if they were made to be hugged. Try putting them in a pen, though, and things can go wrong very quickly. So what hidden set of rules determined which animals could enter our homes and which ones would remain forever wild? First, we need to separate two ideas that are often confused. Taming changes the behavior of one individual animal, like training a tiger to perform. That tiger may learn to obey commands, but its offspring will still be born wild. Domestication goes much deeper. Over many generations, the genes of an entire population begin to change. Domesticated animals are born more comfortable around humans, and some have become so dependent on us that surviving without human care would be difficult. The first animal to cross that line wasn't a cow, a horse, or a chicken. It was the dog. More than 15,000 years ago, humans were still living as hunter-gatherers. We hadn't begun farming grain, and permanent houses were still far in the future. Yet the ancestors of modern dogs, Ice Age gray wolves, were already appearing around human camps. That was the beginning of one of the strangest and most important partnerships in history. But this isn't a story about prehistoric people capturing animals one by one and teaching them to sit. Domestication happened through three different routes: the commensal pathway, the prey pathway, and the directed pathway. Some animals approached humans on their own. Others began as prey. And still others were deliberately selected because humans wanted them to perform a particular job. Let's begin with the commensal pathway. The wolves that feared humans the least started creeping toward the refuse around our camps, searching for bones and scraps of meat. A free meal is persuasive even during the Ice Age. Over time, these wolves discovered that staying near humans meant easier food and protection from other predators. Humans noticed something useful too. Their new visitors could hear, smell, and warn of danger long before we could. Here's where things get strange. As humans repeatedly favored the calmest animals, those animals began changing in appearance as well. Upright ears became floppy. Straight tails began to curl. White patches appeared in their coats. Their faces often looked smaller, younger, and more appealing to us. This collection of unexpected traits became known as domestication syndrome. But why would selecting for friendliness reshape an animal's face? One possible explanation involves neural crest cells, a group of cells that help form parts of the nervous system, pigmentation, ears, and facial bones. By choosing animals that were less aggressive, humans may also have unintentionally altered how these cells developed. The result could be an animal that was not only calmer, but also had a shorter muzzle, softer ears, and unusual coat patterns. And the animals weren't the only ones adapting. When humans turned to farming, the food around our settlements became much richer in rice and other grains. Dogs had to adjust to the new menu. Over time, many developed more copies of the AMY2B gene, helping them digest starch more efficiently than their wolf ancestors. Think about that for a second. Humans changed what they ate, and dogs changed genetically so they could keep sharing dinner with us. While dogs moved toward our campfires on their own, sheep, goats, and cattle entered human life through a different route. The prey pathway. At first, they were simply hunted for meat. But as wild herds became harder to find, humans realized that killing every animal they encountered was a terrible long-term strategy. Instead of constantly chasing new prey, they began controlling and protecting herds, turning them into living reserves of food. Bones recovered from ancient settlements showed just how carefully those early herders managed their animals. Young males were often killed for meat, while most females were kept alive to reproduce and provide milk. This was no longer the behavior of hunters eating whatever they could catch, Humans had become true herders, and the door to agricultural civilization had begun to open. Then humans discovered something even more valuable than meat. Sometimes an animal was worth far more alive. Cows and goats could provide milk day after day. Sheep produced wool for surviving harsh winters. Strong animals could pull plows and carry heavy loads. This shift became known as the secondary products revolution. A cow was no longer just a few meals waiting to happen. It had become a living source of food and labor that could keep giving for years. Once humans learned to manage herds of sheep, goats, and cattle, they grew more ambitious. And history suggests that whenever humans become confident, they eventually look at another animal and think, I can probably control that one too. That was the beginning of the directed pathway domestication by deliberate design. Horses, donkeys, and camels were not raised simply for food. They were selected as living tools for transportation, farming, and warfare. Of all these animals, the horse caused the greatest revolution. But there was a problem. Not every horse was physically suited to carrying a rider. Around 4,200 years ago, horses with a variant of the GSDMC gene and a more rider-friendly spinal structure were selectively bred. From that moment on, humans no longer moved through history only on foot. They galloped across grasslands, crossed entire continents, and pushed warfare into a completely new gear. But if humans could ride horses, why not zebras? This is where the Anna Karenina principle comes in. Every successfully domesticated species must meet the same basic conditions, while each failed candidate falls short in its own particular way. Put simply, an animal must pass 6 tests before domestication can work. Fail even one, and the whole experiment may end with a broken fence and a farmer running for his life. The first test is diet. An animal cannot be too expensive to feed. Carnivores require enormous amounts of meat, and producing that meat means raising even more animals just to feed them. The longer the food chain, the less practical the arrangement becomes. That is why herbivores, omnivores, and animals willing to eat leftovers have always had a major advantage. The second test is growth rate. An animal may be strong and intelligent, but if it takes 15 years to mature, the farmer will probably lose patience first. Elephants are a perfect example. They can be trained, but they grow slowly and reproduce slowly, which is why they have never been fully domesticated. Sheep, pigs, and chickens are different. They mature quickly, breed early, and begin providing useful returns within months or a few years. Next comes the ability to reproduce in captivity, a test that many species fail completely. Some animals need huge territories, elaborate courtship rituals, or very specific environmental conditions. Put them inside a pen, and they simply decide that continuing the species can wait. Successful domestic animals are more practical. They keep breeding even in limited spaces, despite humans standing nearby and watching with a remarkable lack of privacy. The fourth test is temperament. An animal may eat little, grow quickly, and reproduce easily, but none of that matters if it constantly tries to bite its keeper. Zebras may resemble horses, but they are aggressive, unpredictable, and notorious for biting down and refusing to let go. They are not horses wearing striped pajamas. They are entirely different animals, and they seem deeply committed to reminding humans of that fact. The fifth test is how an animal reacts to fear. Many species, including deer, panic and scatter when danger appears. In captivity, they may charge straight into a fence and injure themselves. Good domestic candidates tend to remain calmer, or at least gather into a herd instead of sprinting in every possible direction. That makes it far easier for humans to move, protect, and control them without turning every trip to the pasture into a chaotic chase. The final test is social structure. Solitary animals are rarely interested in taking orders from anyone. Sheep, cattle, and horses, on the other hand, already live in groups and naturally follow a leader. Humans simply stepped into that role. Once the animals accepted a herder as the new authority figure, an entire group could be guided at once. And that is the real secret. Humans did not create order from nothing. We inserted ourselves into a system that nature had already built. But not every animal needed humans to lead it into a pen. Cats essentially domesticated themselves. As farming villages appeared, grain stores attracted mice, and the mice attracted wildcats. A silent agreement took shape. The cats eliminated the thieves stealing human food, and humans allowed the cats to remain nearby. Here's the interesting part. Domestic cats are still genetically very similar to their wild ancestors because they never fully surrendered control to us. That will come as no surprise to anyone who has ever lived with one. While cats quietly claimed a corner of the kitchen, donkeys and camels opened up regions humans had once struggled to reach. Donkeys were domesticated in North Africa, where their strength made them ideal for carrying goods across dry, unforgiving landscapes. Later, dromedary and Bactrian camels helped people cross enormous deserts. They carried water, merchandise, and ideas from one civilization to another. Many ancient trade routes existed for one simple reason. These animals could travel for days without asking for a gas station. On the other side of the world, people in the Andes faced a very different challenge. High in the mountains, the air was thin, the climate was cold, and farmland was scarce. Yet alpacas and llamas thrived. They provided meat, wool, and a reliable way to transport goods along steep mountain paths. Because they could tolerate cold temperatures and low oxygen better than most domestic animals, they became the economic foundation of highland communities and helped support the prosperity of the Inca Empire. And that was only the most visible part of their impact. Domestic animals also quietly changed the size of the human population itself. Once meat, milk, and animal labor became more reliable, families could support more children. Animal milk provided additional nutrition after weaning, while draft animals helped farmers produce more food from the same amount of land. Humanity gradually expanded from small hunting groups of a few dozen people and a global population of roughly 10 million to billions. In other words, many of us are alive today because an ancestor decided to keep a goat instead of eating it immediately. But here's where the story takes a darker turn. When humans, cattle, pigs, and poultry began living close together, bacteria and viruses gained new opportunities to mingle as well. Some pathogens learned to jump from animals into humans, creating what we now call zoonotic disease. Influenza, smallpox, and measles all have histories connected to prolonged contact with domesticated animals. These diseases claimed countless lives. Over many generations, however, they also created evolutionary pressure that helped some human populations develop stronger resistance. Pigs perfectly capture this relationship, a bargain that was both incredibly useful and dangerously complicated. They may have entered human life through two different routes, as prey that people hunted and as scavengers drawn toward human waste. Pigs will eat almost anything, and they are remarkably efficient at turning leftovers into meat. Think of them as four-legged biological recycling machines. But they also compete with humans for grain and can carry a wide range of diseases, which means the partnership has never been entirely simple. Chickens may also have begun with an accidental encounter. Their ancestors were red junglefowl, forest birds native to Southeast Asia. As humans expanded fields of rice and millet, these birds moved closer to collect fallen seeds. Over time, people kept the individuals that were less fearful and reproduced more successfully. A genetic change involving the TSHR gene reduced seasonal breeding patterns and helped domestic chickens lay eggs more regularly. From a relatively secretive forest bird, the chicken became one of the most numerous animals on Earth. But not every important domestic animal has four legs. Honeybees provide honey and wax while also pollinating crops. Silkworms have been altered so dramatically that the adults can barely fly and depend almost completely on humans. These tiny creatures help create enormous industries. Honey was once one of the world's most valuable sources of sweetness, while silk fueled trade routes that stretched across continents. Sometimes history is not carried forward by a horse. Sometimes it is woven by a tiny caterpillar eating a leaf. And the evidence shows that humans did not see domestic animals as mere tools. In many ancient graves, dogs were carefully buried beside people. On the island of Cyprus, a cat was placed in a human grave around 9,500 years ago. Rituals like these suggest that the relationship had already grown beyond food, labor, and protection. Animals were becoming companions, spiritual symbols, and members of the family. Domestication was no longer only about changing genes. It was also about the formation of emotional bonds between species. But selective breeding always comes with a price. When humans allow only a small number of animals to reproduce, the genetic diversity of the entire population begins to shrink. This is known as a population bottleneck. Many purebred dogs today have highly distinctive appearances, but they are also more vulnerable to inherited diseases than genetically diverse populations. We created animals that were more attractive, more obedient, and better suited to our needs. In exchange, they often became weaker and more dependent than their wild ancestors. And that is an important reminder. Domestication does not merely change an animal. It places that animal's biological future in human hands. Domesticated animals didn't just transform individual villages. They carried entire civilizations across the world. Horses transported people, languages, and technologies over vast grasslands. Camels moved goods and ideas through deserts. Sheep, goats, and cattle served as mobile food supplies, allowing migrating communities to settle in unfamiliar lands. Follow the tracks of domesticated animals, and you are also tracing the migration routes of humanity itself. But here's where the story turns back toward us. What if humans didn't just domesticate animals? What if at some point we also began domesticating ourselves? Compared with our distant ancestors, modern humans tend to have smaller faces, lighter brow ridges, and less intimidating features. In large communities, people who cooperated and controlled violent impulses may have had a better chance of surviving and being accepted. In other words, society may have quietly favored individuals who were easier to live with, which, honestly, is a reasonable standard for any neighbor. That possibility leads us to a gene called BAZ1B. It helps regulate neural crest cells as an embryo develops, and changes involving it may influence facial structure, social behavior, and communication. Here's where it gets interesting. Researchers have explored similar biological mechanisms in other animals, including fish. That raises a strange possibility. Tameness may not be something unique to dogs or humans. It may emerge from a deeper biological pattern shared across very different species. Domestication, however, never brought only companionship and reliable meals. Once livestock became property, people with large herds could accumulate far more wealth than those with none. Animals could be traded, inherited, and passed down through generations. Over time, the gaps in wealth and power grew wider. Pastures expanded, forests retreated, and wild species lost their habitats. Humans became more secure and better fed, but nature ended up paying part of the bill. And the process is still happening. Today, humans are bringing hundreds of species of fish, shrimp, and other aquatic animals into farming systems. What took thousands of years with cattle and sheep can now happen much faster through genetics and modern technology. We select animals that grow quickly, resist disease, and tolerate crowded conditions. The ancient path of domestication is continuing beneath the water. The only difference is that this time, humans supposedly understand exactly what they are doing, at least in theory. But there is an important lesson here. An animal that cannot be domesticated is not a failed version of one that can. Zebras, tigers, and deer are not badly behaved. They simply evolved to live by different rules. Some need enormous territories. Some are solitary. Others react to danger with extreme speed and panic. Nature needs both the animals curled beside the fire and the creatures that will never cross our doorstep. Domestication should not be seen as conquest. It is a rare kind of agreement between species. Think back over the entire journey. It began with wolves scavenging around human camps during the Ice Age. Then sheep, goats, and cattle were managed as living stores of food. Horses, camels, and donkeys became transportation. Eventually, humans built high-tech farms capable of controlling temperature, diet, reproduction, and genetics. Tiny biological changes produced enormous leaps in civilization. Humanity did not move forward alone. In many ways, we were pulled there by an entire procession of animals. That changes how we should see ourselves. Humans often tell history as a story of intelligence, tools, and brilliant inventions. But behind every city are the footprints of cattle, horses, dogs, cats, and countless other species. They gave us food, protection, transportation, labor, and companionship. In return, we reshaped their bodies, behavior, and evolutionary futures. Modern humanity is not solely the product of human achievement. It is the result of thousands of years of cooperation among many different species. Earth has now become a vast web of dependence, We raise animals for food and labor, but they also sustain our population, economies, and cultures. Remove one link, and the effects spread through the rest of the chain. This relationship is no longer as simple as owner and animal. It is a system in which both sides have changed so deeply that neither could easily return to the way life existed before. So the next time you see a dog resting by the door, a cat asleep on the couch, or chickens scratching around the yard, pause for a moment. You are not merely looking at a familiar animal. You are looking at the living result of thousands of years of selection, cooperation, and adaptation. From Ice Age, refuse piles to modern cities, gentleness and the ability to live together became a kind of superpower. And perhaps the most remarkable part is not that humans domesticated animals. It is that, throughout the journey, those animals were quietly shaping us too.